The date is November 4th, 2007. The 4-3 Chargers are on the road visiting Minneapolis to play the 2-5 Vikings in Week 9 NFL football. These two teams aren't rivals, they play 2,000 miles away from each other, and one team is projected to win its division, the other to come dead last. So why does this game matter? Because two individuals changed the history of the then 88-year-old league over the course of a few hours. So let's meet our players. This is Antonio Cromartie, the 19th pick in the 2006 draft, now in his second season. He spent most of his rookie year getting limited touches and some action on special teams, but this year he's exploded into an all-pro talent. Just last week, in an emotional home game in San Diego amidst the ongoing California wildfires, Cromartie put on a show with 2 interceptions paired with 2 defensive touchdowns, one of which was a 69-yard pick six to single-handedly outscore the Texans' offense. But all this was just the icing on the cake for a 35-10 blowout, which running back LaDainian Tomlinson called one for the fans. Tomlinson's a superstar in his own right, as well as another key piece in this story. He's coming off an MVP season where he scored an NFL record 186 points. Here's a graph of some of the highest scoring seasons in NFL history. Across the board, things have seemed to even out as players reach the peak possible performance that the human body can achieve. But over here, a few stories up, is Tomlinson. He isn't a player on the Chargers, he is the Chargers. If we take his points and compare it with the rest of the team, we can see that he scored 38% of all of them. In fact, let's take this one step further and look at the ground game of a division, the NFC West. The Rams had 5 rushing touchdowns, the 49ers had 8, the Cardinals, who went 500 that year, had 9, and the playoff-bound Seahawks also had 9. Do some quick math and you get 31 rushing touchdowns for the entire NFC West division. I wonder how many touchdowns LT had that year. So yeah, there's little doubt he'll be leading the NFL in anything and everything rushing this year. So who could possibly contend with a prime LaDainian Tomlinson? Looking back at his college highlights, it's a wonder that there was any doubt about Adrian Peterson, a Houston-born native to a mother who was a world-class track and field athlete and a father who was a star shooting guard at Idaho State. Peterson had the genes to do great things. As a rookie going into the 2007 season, he decided to introduce himself by taking a quick out 60 yards to the house. 5 weeks later, he proved it wasn't rookie luck when he rushed for 224 yards, setting a new franchise record, along with 3 incredible touchdown runs.
And here is Peterson. Peterson breaks one tackle, changes direction, and here is Peterson driving to the end zone, and Tillman is blocked, and Peterson gets in for the score. 1st and 10 from the 27. Adrian Peterson with a burst. Peterson! Charles Tillman, the only one who can try to get him. He can't. Touchdown!
This is what we're going to see and what the league is finding out, that this guy is the best.
His 361 all-purpose yards put him within arm's reach of Glenn Milburn's single-game record. As a rookie, I cannot stress that enough. He was coming close to records that still haven't been touched for decades, and he was barely old enough to drink a hard seltzer. Now, going into Week 9, Peterson sits second in the league with 740 rushing yards. He's taken a commanding lead over Tomlinson's 617, and he's showing no signs of letting up. So we've arrived at this historic Sunday in Minneapolis. 60,000 fans pack into the Metrodome to watch a blowout. They're wrong. What they're about to witness is the equivalent to a grown man taking candy from a baby. Except that baby is the Chargers' defense, and that grown man is a titan named Adrian Peterson. The game starts with punts on back-to-back drives. Then, the Chargers' offense, led by a young stud named Phillip Rivers, managed to make it all the way down to the 1, letting Tomlinson punch in a touchdown run. With this touchdown, Tomlinson surpassed Jim Brown on the all-time rushing touchdowns list with his 107th TD, an event which Vikings fans hoped would help justify the $300 tickets to their wives. Oh, and the $15 popcorn. But Andre Allison was having none of that, taking the kickoff 60 yards into enemy territory, which, looking back on it, was some nice foreshadowing.
And Allison from a yard deep. Fakes the pitch, goes right up the middle. 30, 40, across midfield and deep into San Diego territory.
He even gave a little pump fake at the start to open up the middle. So, props to you, rookie. Weirdly enough, 4 weeks later against the Lions, Allison will return another kickoff 104 yards for a touchdown, a Vikings franchise record. Anyway, the Vikings drove down the field and AP capped off the drive with a 1-yard touchdown of his own. Tie game, ended the first quarter. So it looks like things could be interesting after all. The second quarter went scoreless, with Peterson getting stopped at the line multiple times. For anyone watching, it would have looked like a mild, even below average performance for Adrian Peterson. Now it's the last play of the half. The Vikings kicking team files out onto the field for a chance to shift momentum going into halftime with a 58-yard field goal. Career Packer Ryan Longwell lines up for the kick. The longest he'd ever made was 4 yards shorter, but the then #1 all-time scoring cheesehead would get a good look thanks to the indoor stadium. Now you're probably wondering why I'm highlighting this play. Since you're so bright, you might be putting pieces together in your head. Antonio Cromartie hasn't been mentioned yet in the video. And you did call a 60-yard kickoff return, foreshadowing. And hey, wait a minute, the title says 2 records. You're absolutely right, and the number 31 at the bottom of the screen is Cromartie. So let's see what he does.
And it comes up just short.
And they're going to return it.
This is Cromartie. And Cromartie down the right sideline with a head of steam to the 30, 20, 10, 5, touchdown.
What still amazes me about this play is the footwork. Cromartie has to have the presence of mind to keep his feet inside of the end zone while shifting the rest of his attention towards hauling in a football falling from the sky at 50 miles an hour. If we take a closer look at his plant foot before he takes off, we can safely assume that he has a little under 2 inches to spare, or about the size of a pinky. He should have gotten a 99 agility rating in Madden for this play alone. And, because of a new league rule that rounds down to the nearest yard for every recorded play, this 109-yarder can only ever be matched, not topped, a fact that I'm sure lets Cromartie sleep easier at night. It's not so often that a player is guaranteed a spot in the history books, but this is definitely one of those instances. Now the run itself really wasn't anything special as far as touchdown returns go. In returns, the goal is to get to the sidelines as soon as you can, which Cromartie obviously did. But this wasn't just any return. Let's take a moment to consider who's on the field. There's starting right guard Artis Hicks, number 79, who weighs about 312 pounds. And there's Bryant McKinney, number 74, who's about 355 pounds. You're probably starting to get my point. Let's see how they did chasing a 210-pound Cromartie who runs a 4.47.
With a head of steam to the 30, 20.
See, these guys don't practice tackling. They really don't even practice for situations like this. In fact, Dan Dierdorf does a pretty good job explaining this.
That would be 109 yards on the return.
And Brad Childress, you could fry an egg on the top of his head. His field goal kicking team just went to sleep. On a long field goal, you got to act like you're on a punt team, and you have to cover it.
So this was just a 1 in a million play, right? It's November 26th of last year, and a rookie cornerback hustles onto the field with the rest of the return team following a Raiders touchdown. In a run with striking similarities to the one tonight, Cromartie took the ball 91 yards, the longest return the Vikings had had since 2001. Unfortunately, Cromartie's reputation as a kick return specialist wouldn't last thanks to yet another returnist in this saga, Darren Sproles. The Chargers drafted Sproles in the 4th round of the 2005 draft. He then remained the third-string running back and only saw action as a kick and punt returner for the next 2 seasons. This will be his breakout year though, since next week he'll make history with his first 2 touchdowns being on kick and punt returns, which hasn't happened since the inception of the league. He'll go on to amass an impressive portfolio, including a total of 2 kickoff returns and 7 punt returns for touchdowns, good enough to tie him for 6th all-time. In fact, these 2 teams seem to breed return specialists. Percy Harvin, one of the fastest and most entertaining players to ever return a football, would be drafted 2 years later by the Vikings. And Cordell Patterson, who was also drafted by the Vikings, tied Cromartie's 109-yard record in 2020 against the Vikings in the Metrodome, the very same stadium where Cromartie did it 11 years earlier. With that return, Patterson elevated himself to elite company, tied with Leon Washington and Josh Cribbs for all-time kick return touchdowns. But enough about returns, we have another record to get to. Here's a graph showing every run Peterson's had so far. The red line represents the average of these runs, and his pace on the night. The blue line at the top represents the yards needed to break the current record set by Jamal Lewis 4 years earlier. Heading into the locker room, Peterson is sitting at 43 yards on the night. At this pace, he's set to reach an 86-yard game, which, compared with the rest of the league averages on the year, would be solid, but still underwhelming. AP wastes no time reminding his franchise where it's headed with a massive 64-yard touchdown run minutes into the half. And from here, the mighty Chargers defense is powerless to stop him.
Stop handing it to him.
He'd score a second time later in the fourth with a 46-yard touchdown run, but that wasn't the stat everyone was paying attention to. With a minute 58 remaining on the clock and the Vikings offense pinned down at the 10, I'll bet you can guess what he does next. In fact, if it weren't for the horse collar tackle at the end by Marlon McCree, he would have had 350 yards on the night. Instead, 294 yards. Two more to go.
Adrian Peterson is coming back into the game. Dan, is there anyone in the building who doesn't know that Adrian Peterson is going to get this handoff?
It's come down to the final play of the night, and as AP chants ring throughout the stadium, history is made.
Right now, the Chargers, they don't want it to happen here.
Peterson to the 30. Clock continues to move at 53, 52, 51 seconds. Let's see how much they give him on the play. They give him 3 on the play. That gives him 296 for the day.
Well, I wouldn't want anybody to revise this and take one back. I'd try to get a couple more just to be safe.
That's the second NFL record set that we have seen here today.
And they're going to kneel on the ball.
I really would like to leave it there. I wish I could, and I'm sure Adrian and Antonio do too. But we have to continue. The Chargers play the defending Super Bowl champions, the Colts, the next week, where Cromartie would get a chance at the spotlight in his first NFL start. Boy oh boy did he shine. Cromartie came down with 3 Peyton Manning passes that night, of the franchise record 6 interceptions that he threw. Only 20 other players have ever thrown 6 or more interceptions since the AFL-NFL merger, and only 4 have done it in the last century. Peyton actually threw 43% of all his season interceptions that night. In fact, if you take away this performance altogether, Manning would have tied Brady for the fewest interceptions out of all the full season starters. I'm sure Peyton Manning wished he could forget all about this game, but as luck would have it, it would become immortalized with Cromartie's 3rd interception. You could easily make comparisons to the infamous Odell Beckham catch. Even the color schemes match, but for me, that would overlook the fact that this guy wasn't even a receiver. The age-old joke is, if he had hands, he'd play offense. With that being said, let's see those hands.
This one was pretty much the most unbelievable one.
Manning loops it down the sideline. It is going to be Antonio Cromartie. 3 picks, 1 game. What a player!
In week 13, Cromartie pulled in 2 more to bring his league total to 8. Then, in the following week, he tied the franchise record of 9 interceptions. He'd continue his streak into the next week with his 10th and final interception of the season, finishing top of the league in the category, but still well short of the record 14 by Night Train Lane over half a century earlier. That's not to say he isn't in good company, even beating out over half of the other single-season interception leaders in the NFL's history. This solid young Chargers squad made a decent playoff run, stopped short of course by the undefeated, well-oiled machine that was Belichick's 2007 Patriots. It's a miracle that the Chargers even kept the game close, with all three offensive stars, Tomlinson, Rivers, and Antonio Gates, injured. If their team had been healthy, it's possible that the undefeated Patriots team season would have been ended in despair before it could be ended in despair. But it wasn't, and the Chargers were bounced from the playoffs. The next season, Cromartie proclaimed that he was out to get Lane's record, but all he could manage was a depressing 2 interceptions on the year. The next year, 3. At first it can be assumed that he got lucky, he was an outlier. Cromartie later revealed that he'd actually played the entire season with a broken hip he got in week 1 of the 2008 season. An injury that I'm sure burdens much of the blame for ruining a career filled with promise and potential. He'd be traded to the Jets in 2010, then released 4 years later. From there, he'd keep on moving, first to the Cardinals, then back to the Jets, and finally ending his career with the Colts. He should have been at the back end of a Hall of Fame career, having shattered the interceptions record a few seasons ago. Instead, he was released after 4 games. He never played another snap of football. Unlike Cromartie, on paper, Peterson's story after this game isn't really sad at all. He's a guaranteed Hall of Famer who's had numerous record seasons throughout his lengthy career. But don't put away the tissues just yet, because we still haven't talked about all of his 2007 season. Remember how I showed you that based on his numbers in the first half of that game, he was on pace for a fairly average night? Here's a similar style graph showing Peterson's season so far. At the moment, he's on pace for a 2,072-yard season, 33 yards behind Eric Dickerson's 84 season with the Rams. If he keeps this up, he'll be the youngest player to join the 2,000-yard club. But out of nowhere, disaster strikes. Against their rival Green Bay Packers the next week, Peterson suffers an apparent knee injury and leaves the game. He's torn his ACL. Now you and I know he'll be able to play football again, but we have the benefit of hindsight. This is a luxury that is not afforded to Brett Favre. According to Packers GM Ted Thompson, quote, "When Favre decided in March that he was leaning towards playing, the organization wasn't quick towards embracing him," end quote. All thanks to the newly acquired Aaron Rodgers and the future he would bring to the franchise. Favre would retire for a short stint and sparked a media frenzy when he returned to the Packers and all but demanded his job back. After they refused, Favre forced a trade to the Jets before heading to Minnesota, the Packers' rivals, the next season. But it's important to remember that part of Favre's contract granted him the option to void any trades that the Packers made, which would have made a trip out west possible even earlier. The reason I bring this up is because while Favre was making this decision, there was still a fury of speculation regarding the health of Adrian Peterson and whether or not he would return for the 2008 season healthy. Assuming Peterson was never injured, it's not too far-fetched to assume Favre would want to join the #1 rushing offense and the #1 run-stopping defense. Not to mention, they just added future All-Pro center John Sullivan, Bernard Berrien to add depth to the receiving corps, Benny Sapp, Michael Boulware, and Medeo Williams to help the weak secondary, and others. But by far, the most convincing move of the 2008 offseason was the trade for Jared Allen from the Chiefs. Coming off a season where he led the NFL in sacks, Allen was the perfect centerpiece for their already lethal pass rush. So how did the Vikings defense perform in 2008? The Vikings once again were the league's best run-stopping defense, while also improving to 18th in passing defense. This totaled for 6th in yards given up, one of the best defenses that year. This is despite leading the league by 133 in yards conceded through penalties, which, should there have only been the league average of 712 yards conceded, they would have tied for the 3rd best defense in the NFL. Now, add to that a healthy Adrian Peterson, who, even coming off a terrible injury in real life, led the league with 1,760 rushing yards. So let's factor in Favre. While this is obviously inaccurate and not a real representation of what the Vikings would have looked like, I'm just going to take Favre's numbers and transfer them over to the Vikings' 2008 stats. The two teams did have very comparable receiving corps, so it's not like Favre had a special target or a star receiver at the Jets. So we add them up. 3,303 and 2,332. And there we are, 5,635, good for 8th in the NFL. Now this might seem slightly underwhelming at first, and I agree. So in this hypothetical, we need to consider that the following year, Favre was actually on the Vikings, and their offense was the second best in the league, which means more likely than not, this has been a conservative estimate of what could have been. Also, it's exceptionally rare for a team to have a great offense and defense. Just looking at the difference between total offensive and defensive yards paints a scary picture for the rest of the league, with the Vikings having a net positive 1,246 yards, the best in the entire league, beating out even the Super Bowl winning Pittsburgh Steelers. Needless to say, this would definitely lead to an even better record than 10-6 and the avoidance of the Eagles' upset in the wildcard round. Any further guesswork seems unnecessary. I think you get the picture. A 2008 Favre Vikings would have had a shot at winning it all. Instead, the quarterback would spend another year deteriorating before making the move to Minnesota, a choice that I'm sure haunts Vikings fans who are yet to see the Lombardi Trophy come home. Peterson's career, like Cromartie's, is a jumble of speculation. Would he have broken the single-season rushing record? Did he ever truly recover? What would an injury-free Peterson have looked like in his prime? How would the entire NFL landscape be different? In the end, all we're left with is this final play against the Chargers. A glimpse into an alternate reality that could have been, and the heartbreaking tale of a man who could have made it happen.
Peterson to the 30.